Track and field has a huge problem. Hey, what is going on, y'all? Welcome back to MJPTV, where we put track and field first. I'm MJP, and before we get into the content, I just want to let you know that this is my own personal opinion, so if you get butthurt about it, that's kind of on you. But, just want to get this off my chest, been thinking about it. This is going to be more of a discussion type video, so let's go. Okay, so the biggest problem with track and field, in my opinion, is the lack of storytelling about our sport. And so I'm talking about movies, TV shows, just cinematic content that's created and showcases the amazing stories that there are in track and field, right? And it's a severely underserved sport, right? That's why there's channels like mine, you have Running Report, Athlete Specials, so many great track and field channels that try and fill that gap. But we don't have the means to create the kind of content I'm talking about. So I'm going to give 3 examples throughout this video to kind of showcase my point of how beneficial it could be with growing the sport, which ultimately will attract new fans and more money and will ultimately benefit track and field as a whole. So let's get into it. So first, let's address the main culprits that I see who have really failed to grow the sport when they've had such a great opportunity. So I'll start with the one that I think is least culpable, which is Milesplit, who's owned by FloTrack and FloTrack in general. And they've been producing this kind of content I've really wanted to see for a couple years, but they stopped around 2 years ago. They haven't made anything of the sort because they used to have the DeSoto series, which was a mini docu-series, covering DeSoto High School and their track program. They had their Driven series, which, highlighted an individual athlete. And, they had trailers, and it really gave us a deeper look into their story, right? And so they haven't made that kind of content in 2 years, which is disappointing to me because, there was such an opportunity, especially with the pandemic and so many people watching online, that they, if track and field had a show like a hallmark, like, hey, this is what track and field is, it could have benefited the sport so much. So I'll talk more about, those things coming up, but let's get into the next company. So next I want to talk about USATF and the lack of action they've shown, especially from the CEO, Max Siegel. So I'm not hating on this brother. I'm just talking about an area where I think, our sport has been underserved. And so Max Siegel, he's this former, graduate from Notre Dame, lawyer, and, he's the current CEO of USATF. And he's done work with, sports outside of track and field. He's done NASCAR and other things, and he's actually a producer. And he's made films about NASCAR and racing, but what's been done about track and field? We have no real recent movies. There is no ongoing docu-series. There is no there's nothing on Netflix, nothing of the sort. But NASCAR can get it. I think, Max Siegel's been at USATF almost 10 years now, or getting close to that. And, our sport hasn't gotten anything to really showcase itself, which is severely disappointing. And I'm hoping, my video can maybe do something to help change that. Okay, last and certainly not least is World Athletics, and I have the biggest problem with them because they are the governing body of athletics around the world, professional athletics. And I haven't seen much from them. Like, there's so many great stories. Like, you could talk about the rise of the sprinters in Asia. You can talk about, the big 3 of sprinting, talk about the Caribbean, the Americas, and, the UK and Europe, right? But there has been, what can we point to is an ongoing series, delving into these great stories and really showcasing track and field to the world. There's really nothing like it. And I'm hoping that we can see something like that in the future. But let's just get into some of the examples of things I would want around track and field to really showcase and tell the story and get people engaged with our sport. Okay, so the first example of the kind of content I really would want to see these companies create is something like Hard Knocks or NFL Films. And so Hard Knocks, if you don't know, is a docu-series program covering one NFL team throughout their training camp during the preseason. And so I think Hard Knocks has been on since 2000. And it's been a great show, and premieres pull in hundreds of thousands of views. And track and field really doesn't have anything comparable to that. You could showcase, okay, we're going to go cover the Nike training group in their preseason training, or this time we're going to, look at, off-season workouts for Jamaican sprinters. Something, in NFL films is really the NFL's kind of propaganda machine where, they produce this high-quality cinematic content that they even, they put out clips almost weekly of NFL films just diving into the, the really interesting stories that'll build a connection with an audience. But, none of these corporations have done, any productions like this. So, okay, the next example I have is a Netflix docuseries about Formula One, which is the premier racing series in the world, called Drive to Survive. And I have a personal story about this one because I didn't know anything about, Formula One or, single car seater racing like that ever. Like, I'd never, really covered it, wasn't into NASCAR. But one of my favorite YouTubers, Zach Somler on Strong Opinion Sports, recommended this show, and I fell in love with Formula One after 2 seasons. And it was all because they had this media product to showcase their stories, their personalities, engage with these drivers, really show their personal journeys and struggles. And that's what got me engaged. Like, I did not care about racing at all, and yet they made a lifelong fan out of me because of 2 seasons of a Netflix show. Like, I hope you understand the power behind, storytelling. And a great example is Daniel Ricciardo. He's one of the F1 drivers. He was recently interviewed about the impact of Drive to Survive in America and how it's created fans like me just from the exposure the show gives to, an audience that was untapped. And track and field doesn't have anything like that. Like, we're in 2021. And there's nothing I can point to and tell people like, hey, are you interested in track and field? Watch this, or, this is what my sport is about. Like, what is there to get people who don't care about the sport engaged? So, Drive to Survive is a great example. Like, there have been hundreds of thousands of new F1 fans just produced off of this show, and the amount of momentum that has been created. And shout out to, the owners of F1, Liberty, I think it's, Liberty Media. And, they're behind this. They're a good media corporation who's really elevated the platform of F1 in America. So, okay, last and certainly not least, this is one you guys probably have never heard of, which is a manga and anime called Haikyuu. And it's about boys playing high school volleyball, right? Before I watched the show, I could give a squat about volleyball, right? Like, entertaining, but really seeing this narrative about, all the intricacies that go into volleyball and making the sport interesting through, fictional dramatization, right? There is nothing like that for track and field. And, if you think, well, a show like this really won't have any impact, you would be wrong. So I'm going to put up this graphic showing the number of students in high school volleyball clubs in Japan. And so at the beginning of the graph, it's 09. And as you can see, there's a steady decline over time in the participation in boys volleyball. The release of this manga comes out around 2012. Participation has skyrocketed. Like, the fact that our sport hasn't capitalized on what good storytelling can do in creating an audience and new fans, which is going to produce new revenue, which is ultimately going to make the sport better because then you have more to spend on it. And there are just so many things just because people created a connection through story. But there is nothing like that. Like, I hope you understand. Like, if you couldn't tell, I'm kind of passionate about this. But there's nothing like that, for track and field. Whereas for other sports, football, Formula One, volleyball, all these other, kind of, in football really isn't even underserved, but, these things elevate the platform of their sport and push it out to audiences that probably would have never been interested in it, but make a connection. But just to summarize my thoughts, what I'm really looking for is some kind of, media showcasing all the great stories in our sport. Because you can go to almost any high school, even covering college teams would be incredible. And there's nothing like that. And it's 2021. We have no movies, no TV shows, nothing. And our sport is so great, but people don't care about it. So how do you make them care? How do you build that connection? Like, that's why it's so great that there are so many, you know, track and field YouTubers now who are trying to fill that gap, but we don't have the means to create, you know, this this documentary or TV series. And so it's really up to these bigger corporations, and hopefully this video will challenge them to create that content and see what it can really do for our sport, because we all want our sport to grow. We want to see it, you know, 50 years from now. We don't want to, you know, continue on the path we're on right now, where it's, you know, maybe minuscule growth. In my opinion, we've been stagnant for a few years, and, you know, track and field is mainly supported by people who've either participated or, you know, really that's it. There aren't that many casual fans, in my opinion, that I know of people who watch track and field just because it's entertaining, which it is, but mainly you have to make people care, essentially. So hopefully this video made sense. I know I ranted and rambled on, but, you know, give me your thoughts in the comments below about, you know, what can be done to, you know, increase the visibility of track and field, whether you think my idea is stupid or not. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Take care. God bless.